So you think you might have mental illness and you want to know what you need to do about it? First of all, I want you to know that everything's going to be okay. And that if you are a danger to yourself or to others in the United States, call 911 immediately. I am going to put the number on the screen for the suicide hotline, which is 1-800-273-8255. If you'd rather chat through your computer or through your phone, you can go to suicide.org. They have some specific numbers and people to help with ex-military or military personnel, people dealing with LGBT issues, and they also have international lines. So this episode was supposed to be about once you have found out that you have a mental illness and the steps that you need to go through. I realize that I may need to step back a little bit, and for people that maybe think they might have a mental illness, I realize that it might not surprise anybody that my mind kind of darts into different ways and I get ahead of myself. I promise I will make that video, the videos that I've made so far, and then the one that I will make next, all should be released on the same day. So that video should be out, and no harm, no foul when it comes to that. Now, back to today's topic. If you think you might have a mental illness and you don't know what to do, the first thing that anybody that has dealt with mental illness for years, such as I have, or maybe somebody in the LGBT community that's older and has been through kind of the trials that a person goes through with that experience, anybody that has been there in any kind of emotional situation or emotional journey, at least have progressed along that journey, will tell you that it gets better. And you need to know that, and you need to count on that, right? And so I want to make sure we get that out of the way first. And so the number one thing that I would recommend anybody who thinks they might have a mental illness is to talk to people. Find out what other people's experiences are and share your experience, right? And so the first thing that we need to realize is that bottling things up and kind of going it alone is the absolute worst way to deal with this. And so by talking to people, you're going to lighten your emotional load, just getting it out. And if you don't have anybody immediately, studies have shown just talking, even to yourself, or I'm making a podcast. I don't know if anybody's watching this or if anybody will be watching this. But it's going to help you just sort things out. You're going to hear yourself talk, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes you will realize that your issues aren't quite as bad as they feel, or the way that maybe you think they are. And sometimes by talking things out, you're going to stumble upon the solution to your problems, right? So number one thing, talk either to yourself or to somebody, right? And you're going to notice that makes a great, that helps a great deal. So number two is kind of understanding how things work. I think a lot of times people going through difficult times, let's say that you lost your job or your relationship dissolved or somebody that you care about has deceased and you're feeling really sad. And I think it's important to know that is appropriate. That's the right response. And those are the right times to feel what we call negative emotions. They're actually not negative emotions. Those are just emotions that we feel that we don't care for too much, right? But there are appropriate times to be sad, to be upset, to be angry, to be frustrated, to be hurt, etc., etc. Whatever feeling that you feel, whatever feeling you can feel, has an appropriate time and place for. And so the problem, another thing that you need to be aware of, or we need to be aware of, is that the problem comes when you're feeling these feelings at an inappropriate time. A perfect example, when I was first hospitalized, there was an older woman that would sit in a chair in kind of our living room kind of area, our public space, I guess. And she would sit there, and throughout the day she would laugh, sometimes hysterically, to where she almost couldn't breathe, and then other times be inconsolably crying. And when I first got to the hospital, I was very concerned for her, and because she was crying, and I asked her what was wrong, and she said she didn't know what was wrong. She was just so sad. And then time would pass, I would be doing what I was doing, and then she would be laughing. And I would ask her, what's so funny? And she would say, I don't know. Everything's just so funny. Right? And so obviously those are inappropriate times to be feeling, especially that extreme of emotions. Right? But if you laugh at something that's hysterical, that's appropriate. Right? That's the right response. And if you're sad because something sad happened, or you remembered something, also that is appropriate. And so back to my point, the differences are between acute and chronic, right? And so something that just happens very quickly, not problematic, not something that needs attention, really, right? That's how life works, right? And so one of the things too that maybe people don't always understand is that sometimes we will have symptoms of a mental illness that happen just transiently. A perfect example of this would be when you were a child. If you were playing outside and you ran inside because you heard your parents calling you, or an adult call you, and they didn't call you, right? And so that's a little bit of a mental malfunction, right? You heard something that wasn't real. And so technically that could be deemed a hallucination, right? But because everything that we experience in life and everything that our bodies do is a chemical reaction, and children especially are building those information lines that, I guess, as you could say, in your mind, their brains are going to have these malfunctions, right? And you hear somebody call you, they didn't actually call you. Technically, it's a hallucination, but that's not problematic. It's something that just happens sometimes. And so everybody has these mental and emotional malfunctions. And it doesn't necessarily mean that this is a chronic illness. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need professional help. Much in the same way, a cold is not the same thing as cancer. A sprained ankle is not the same as a broken bone, right? We kind of go through these things individually, just like we would have a cold. Our brain sometimes goes through this period of time where it's technically malfunctioning, but it's going to relieve itself over time, right? And so be aware of that too. Of course, if you need help, get help. I always repeat that. If you need help, get help. And as far as getting the help, there is a lot of different ways to get to Rome, as they say, right? If you're a religious person, your priest or your rabbi or the person in charge of your church, whatever title they go by, will often be very helpful and can keep you grounded. And if this is something out of their capabilities, they will often know people that can help. Psychiatry is another realm, another path that you can take. And then there's psychology. And then within each of those, there are different branches, right? And so, for instance, in psychology, you have people that have a psychoanalytical approach or a behavioral approach. One of the ones that I've gone through and have seen a lot of benefits from is the cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's something that I've already talked about quite a bit informally on this channel. And so as you're going through your journey, you're going to want to practice self-awareness and understand, where are your triggers? What are you feeling? Why are you feeling this? And remember to always try to focus on the roots of the problem, right? And so one of the things that was problematic in my current marriage at the very beginning is that my wife has a very stressful job. And I've gone through a lot of trauma in my past. And so she would come home from work stressed, and then I'm dealing with things that are unresolved. And we would fight about something completely irrelevant. And obviously, let's say we're fighting about the dishes. Well, the dishes don't help her deal with the stress at work, and they obviously don't fix things that I have unresolved in my life. And so fighting about the root, or at least discussing the root or trying to fix the root of the problem, is the only thing that's going to actually fix your problem, right? And so this goes to self-medicating on any other thing that isn't really addressing your issue. You want to really try to hone in on what is bothering you and why are you feeling the things that you're feeling, right? And so one of the most important things that I know I'm going to be covering in a future episode, I've touched on it a little bit because it is already so important, is controlling your thoughts and what you're thinking about. And just a little tip on that, understand that when it comes to thoughts, that it is impossible not to think of something, right? And so if I tell you not to think about a pink elephant and not to think about its big floppy ears or its big long trunk or how big it is and how strong it is and how wide its feet are, don't think about any of that. That's impossible, right? And so what you can do, and what I do, is you can replace your thoughts with something else, right? And so when I tell you to think of a palm tree and a beach and the warm sand and this hot sun and the cold water, well, as you're thinking about that, you're not thinking about that elephant I brought up a little while ago. And so being proactive in controlling your thoughts and taking your mind somewhere as opposed to letting your mind lead the way is something that I find very important. And so I'm going to wrap up this episode by telling you again, if you need help, get help. I'm going to post the numbers again. They'll be in the comments below. Good luck on your journey. If you do have mental illness, as I mentioned in my promo, I believe that once it's harnessed, it can be a superpower. There is some hard times ahead of you maybe, and it won't be easy, but it'll definitely be worth it. And so I will see you next time.